The Roman Empire is still one of the greatest civilizations of all time. They gave us poetry, music, art, and the stories that are still told today. It produces new sciences, medicines, and works of great minds like the ancient Greek philosophers Socrates, Hippocrates, Plato, Aristotle, to mention a few. When we think of ancient Rome, we think of the decadence and luxury of a civilization living lavishly. What we don't think of is the slavery that made it all possible. The Roman Empire ran on slaves. Slavery was such a necessary part of its ecosystem that a massive 1 in 5 systems in the Roman Empire were enslaved. It was common, in fact. Emperor Nero once told by his advisor Seneca that a proposal was once made in the Senato to Sonotto to distinguish slaves from men by their dress, but it then became apparent. How great would be the impending danger if our slaves should begin to count our number in essence, if the slaves would realize how large the number they are and easily rise up against their masters. But first of all, how did the Romans get that many slaves to work for them? Well, the slaves were taken in a number of different ways, and most of them were foreigners, the prisoners that are presented in jail. Or they were the residents of the retired city. They were also sold by the pirates, traders. Some of them were born to slavery and sold themselves to slavery so that they could pay the debt of the forefathers. It was possible, but not common, for people to buy their freedom. So, what did the slaves in the Roman Empire do? Slaves evolved in every facet of Roman life. They were house servants, laborers, gladiators, prostitutes, and even skilled artisans. Depending on their position, a day in the life of the Roman Empire looks very different. Let's take a look to the lives of the slaves of the 4 Roman slaves. Number 1, the gladiator slaves. The first notion of the gladiators began in 264 BC, when a federal politician, Junius Brutus Pera, his first son, had fought to the death in his honor. So he kicked off the beloved in the Roman tradition in Roman Empire gladiator fighting. Some gladiator fighting, some gladiator slaves were forced into the arenas for the punishment and sent to the constant to entertain. As he faced the gory death to the hands, or some were sent to fight with the wild animals. But not all gladiators were slaves. Some were criminals as well. Number 2, the unsaved laborer's slave. The lives of the unskilled labored slaves were even the worst. They were often the people who were enslaved as a punishment and would often be put in fields and worked literally to death. They lived in harsh conditions and were easily replaced. They had a piece of masters who would care for them a little bit. They were forced to work for long hours and work till the breaking point. They were asked to work for the whole day and were forced to work without any break. They were given very little food to eat and liked very harsh lives. They were tied up with chains, and that too 5 men were tied together, and they had no other choice but they had to suffer that pain without any sort of it and but. Number 3, the domestic servant household slave. The household servant slaves were always distinguishable from a regular slave. They lived in the same place with their masters, eat the same food, and would sleep in the same guitars with their masters. The household servants were usually women, weaker women, who could look after the house and the children and also do some of the housework for their masters. Their lives were better as compared to the lives of other domestic workers. The best part was that they had the freedom to their own death. The slaves were treated as property. There were no laws made on the property. You can do anything to the property, which means many a times they were subjected to sexual abuse. The women had to perform sex with their masters, and they had no choice for that. They were also raped and were beaten by the owners. Number 4, the skilled and educated slaves. The skilled slaves were one of the most skilled and the sought after the most expensive available in the ancient time. These were often accountants, cooks, and others who would perform the practical tasks for their company. As they were highly educated and were in high demand, they charged a handsome amount of money, and their lives were also better from other slaves that were there in their lives, and hence they were bought by the people with the top ranking and had to work accordingly. These slaves were also bought by the government so that they could help in the development of that area and were respected.